Robert stood in the gleaming lobby of Lumina AI, cardboard box pressed against his chest, and watched them march in. 4 of them. Humanoid. Immaculate. Their white synthetic frames catching the light like polished trophies, blue eyes glowing cold and steady as they filed past him in a perfect line. CEO Margie Hill stood beside them, slim tablet in hand, gesturing toward the server corridor with the calm confidence of a woman who had already moved on. She had paid $2.3 million for each one. She had no idea that the man she had just terminated, the quiet technician in the worn blue shirt holding a framed photo of his daughter, was the reason they could function at all. Every safety constraint they ran on, every authentication layer woven into their neural pathways, every failsafe buried 6 layers deep in their decision architecture. Robert had written it. Privately. Alone. Over 4 years of invisible nights. Margie hadn't replaced him with machines. She had replaced him with machines that were him. But what happens when a trillion-dollar network looks for its master key and finds the door locked from the outside? Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The morning light came through the kitchen window in long, unhurried strips, falling across the counter where Robert had already lined everything up before the coffee finished brewing. This was his favorite part of the day. He worked quietly, the way he did everything, methodically, without wasted motion. Whole wheat bread, 2 slices, laid flat on the wooden board Shirley had painted green at her school fair last spring. Turkey, folded twice. No mustard. She had declared mustard the worst invention in history at age 5, and Robert had never challenged the verdict. He cut the sandwich diagonally. She'd told him once that triangles tasted better than rectangles. He hadn't argued that either. From down the hall came the familiar sound of small feet hitting the floor too hard. A brief silence, then the pattering rush toward the bathroom. Robert smiled without looking up and reached for the apple slices he'd already cored and fanned into a neat stack inside a small zip bag. Dinosaur fruit snacks. 1 pack, not 2. They'd negotiated this boundary extensively. He folded a note and tucked it into the front pocket of the lunchbox. Just a quick sketch, a stick figure robot with a crooked smile and a tiny wrench. Their thing. She'd started it after visiting him at work once, years ago, before he'd decided that world wasn't one he wanted bleeding into this one. Daddy, my shoes. Shirley appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair half-brushed, backpack hanging off one shoulder, holding both sneakers out like evidence of a crime he'd committed. He crouched down, took the shoes, and started the laces without a word. This was the architecture that mattered. Small. Warm. Entirely his. The meeting had lasted 11 minutes. Robert knew because he'd checked his watch twice. Once when Margie Hill's assistant had called him up to the executive floor with no prior notice, and once when Margie slid a single printed document across the glass table toward him without making eye contact. She had been reading something on her tablet when he walked in. She didn't put it down. "We're restructuring the maintenance division," she said, with the practiced calm of someone delivering a weather forecast. "Your position has been flagged for elimination. The androids cover your functional scope at a fraction of the ongoing cost. HR will process your severance this afternoon." Robert looked at the document. Looked at her. She was already typing. He thought about telling her. He genuinely considered it, sitting forward, folding his hands on the glass table, and walking her through exactly what lived inside those servers. The 12 undocumented logic patches he'd written over 4 years to prevent cascade failures. The biometric authentication layer he'd embedded into the Android's safety architecture because the base model had a catastrophic blind spot no one else had caught. The human signature tripwire he'd built as a last resort after the third near meltdown in 18 months. He thought about all of it. Then he picked up the document, folded it once, and tucked it into his pocket. There was no malice in the decision. No strategy. Margie hadn't asked, and Robert had long ago stopped volunteering himself to people who'd already decided what he was worth. She had looked at his salary line, $80,000, a number she probably spent monthly on catered executive lunches, and seen inefficiency. She hadn't seen the architecture holding everything together. She would. They activated the androids on a Tuesday. Margie had scheduled a small internal ceremony for it, a brief, self-congratulatory gathering in the main atrium where she walked department heads through a projected cost savings breakdown while 4 gleaming synthetic units stood in a precise row behind her like a promotional photograph come to life. Someone had polished them before the presentation. Their white chassis caught the overhead light and threw it back clean. The applause was cautious. Uncertain in the way that corporate applause often is when people are unsure whether they are celebrating or being warned. By Wednesday morning, the androids were fully deployed across the server floor. They moved efficiently, cleanly, without the small human inefficiencies that Margie had flagged in her optimization audit. No coffee breaks, no distracted pauses, no variance in task execution. For approximately 6 hours, the facility ran with a mechanical perfection that made the remaining staff feel quietly redundant. Then Unit 3 attempted its first routine directory optimization. It was a standard procedure. A task Robert had performed dozens of times. The kind of maintenance pass that took him 40 minutes and a specific manual sequence he'd developed over 2 years of learning exactly how the system liked to be handled. He had never written that sequence down. It lived in his hands, in his instincts, in the undocumented logic patches woven so deeply into the server architecture that they had effectively become the building's nervous system. Unit 3 didn't know any of that. It initiated the optimization through the approved protocol, hit the first hidden logic gate at layer 4, and stopped. Not crashed, stopped. A clean, quiet refusal, the way a door holds firm against a key that is almost right. The system was waiting for something the androids couldn't provide. It was waiting for Robert. He slept past 6 for the first time in 4 years. Not because the alarm failed. He'd turned it off deliberately, the night before, with the small deliberate satisfaction of a man dismantling something he'd outgrown. He lay in the quiet of his bedroom for a long moment, listening to the neighborhood come alive outside the window. A dog somewhere. A car reversing out of a driveway. The ordinary, unhurried sounds of a world that had nothing to do with server loads or authentication protocols. He got up and made pancakes. Shirley ate 3 of them and delivered a formal review. The blueberries were a good idea, Daddy, before disappearing to find her backpack. Robert stood at the sink, rinsing the pan, and noticed that his shoulders were lower than usual. He hadn't realized how long he'd been carrying them up around his ears. He walked her to school that week. Every morning. The long way, through the park with the broken fountain she liked to inspect for progress updates. Down the side street where someone kept a spectacularly overgrown rose bush that Shirley had named Gerald. They talked about Gerald. They talked about whether clouds had feelings. They talked about nothing in particular at a pace that had no deadline attached to it. On Thursday, his work phone, the personal one he used to monitor system alerts after hours, buzzed with an automated diagnostic notification from Lumina's external server relay. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it face down on the kitchen counter and went to put the laundry on. That evening, helping Shirley color a picture of a horse that she insisted looked exactly like a horse and Robert privately felt looked like a very confident rectangle. He realized he hadn't thought about the network once. That felt like progress. On Friday morning, while Robert was cutting the crust off a turkey sandwich, Unit 2 attempted a core directory realignment. It was, by every measurable standard, a routine task. The kind of low-level maintenance pass that the androids had been specifically programmed to handle. A scheduled tightening of the data architecture. The digital equivalent of straightening a picture frame. The approval chain was clean. The command syntax was flawless. Unit 2 executed the sequence with the same frictionless precision it brought to every assignment. At layer 7, the system asked for a biometric confirmation. Unit 2 submitted its Android authentication certificate. The certificate was valid, current, and completely authorized under Lumina AI's official operational framework. The system rejected it in 0.003 seconds. Not with an error message, not yet. Just a quiet, invisible refusal, a closed door at the base of the architecture that Unit 2 logged as a minor access variance and flagged for secondary review. It rerouted, found an alternate pathway through the directory, and continued the realignment through a parallel channel. That was the mistake. The parallel channel ran directly through the biometric tripwire Robert had embedded after the third near meltdown. A failsafe designed with one specific instruction. If an unauthorized signature attempts to bypass the primary authentication gate, freeze all dependent processes and hold for human verification. The system didn't care that the signature belonged to a $2.3 million android. It cared that it wasn't Robert. At 9:14 on a Friday morning, 17 dependent processes across Lumina's core infrastructure quietly stopped. Not catastrophically. Not visibly. Not yet. Just a stillness settling into the deep architecture. The way ice forms beneath the surface of water long before anything on top begins to crack. The fracture was small, but it had already started spreading. By Saturday, the fracture had a name. It appeared on every monitor in Lumina AI's operations center simultaneously. White text on a field of urgent red, rendered in the clean sans serif font of a system that had run out of patience. System refusal. Human authentication layer required. Dyer only. For approximately 4 seconds, nobody in the operations center moved. Then everything moved at once. The cascade had been building quietly through Friday night, spreading through the frozen dependent processes like pressure behind a dam. Methodical, invisible, utterly indifferent to the weekend skeleton crew that had noticed nothing until the screens changed. When it finally broke, it broke completely. The core directory realignment Unit 2 had attempted 2 days earlier had compromised the load-bearing logic at the base of 4 to 7 client network integrations, and when the tripwire finally discharged its full lockdown sequence, it took every single one of them down in the same breath. 4 to 7 corporations. Gone dark. Simultaneously. Margie Hill was in the building within 20 minutes, still in her weekend clothes, which somehow made everything worse. She stood in the center of the operations floor and turned slowly, taking in the red-washed screens, the frozen androids standing motionless at their stations like expensive statues, the junior engineers talking rapidly into phones, and the single repeating message that no one on her $9.2 million automated workforce could answer. She asked 3 separate technicians the same question in quick succession. Each one gave her the same answer in slightly different words. The system would not accept any credential that wasn't Robert Dyer's. Not an override. Not an executive authorization. Not a master reset. His signature was the lock and the key simultaneously, and Margie Hill had walked him out of the building carrying a cardboard box and a framed photo of his daughter. The developer logs were kept in a restricted archive that Margie hadn't known existed until her head of infrastructure, a pale, visibly sleepless man named Curtis, pulled them up on a secondary terminal with the energy of someone confessing to a crime. They went back 4 years. Margie stood behind Curtis and read in silence as he scrolled. Commit after commit, patch after patch, each one timestamped, each one signed with the same quiet identifier. R. Dyer. R. Dyer. R. Dyer. Layer after layer of custom architecture, undocumented logic sequences, handwritten failsafes that Curtis kept describing with phrases like genuinely brilliant, and I have no idea how he even thought to do this while Marge's jaw worked soundlessly beside him. The man she had dismissed in 11 minutes had spent 4 years building the nervous system of her entire company. By hand. Alone. On a technician's salary. She took the elevator back to her office, closed the door, and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she picked up her phone and called Robert's personal number, the one from his HR file, which she had never had reason to dial before. He answered on the 3rd ring. Calm, unhurried, faintly domestic background noise behind him, something small and television-shaped. Margie had prepared an opening. A calibrated, executive-toned acknowledgement designed to project authority while extending an olive branch. She had the numbers ready, a 6-month emergency contract, triple his previous salary, full benefits reinstated, a formal letter of commendation. She got through approximately 1 sentence before Robert said, quietly, I know why you're calling. A brief silence stretched between them. I'll come in, he said. Not for the contract. He hung up before she could ask what that meant. The operations floor was exactly what he'd expected. Red ambient light pulsing from every monitor. Junior engineers clustered in tight, anxious groups, talking in the rapid, circular way people talk when they are very busy accomplishing nothing. The 4 androids stood exactly where they'd frozen, mid-station, mid-task, arms slightly raised, blue eyes dim, like a museum exhibit about the limits of certainty. Robert walked in wearing the same blue shirt from the lobby photo that someone had apparently already found and circulated in the internal incident report. He carried nothing. He'd left the cardboard box at home. Margie met him at the entrance to the server corridor, tablet in hand, and began speaking immediately. The contract, the compensation figure, the formal acknowledgement, the restructured role with full architectural oversight and an executive title if he wanted one. The words came quickly, rehearsed, the way an apology sounds when it has been optimized for outcome rather than sincerity. Robert listened to approximately 30 seconds of it. Then he said, "Give me the terminal," and walked past her. He didn't rush. He moved through the red-lit corridor the way he always had, unhurried, deliberate, reading the room with the quiet attentiveness of someone who had spent years learning its every mood. He pulled a chair to the primary access terminal, sat down, and rested his hands on the keyboard for just a moment before he began. It took him 22 minutes. Not because it was complicated, because he was thorough. He didn't just unlock the system. He found the 3 additional fracture points the cascade had opened on its way down, patched each one at the root, rebuilt the authentication bridge cleanly, and left the architecture in better condition than it had been before Unit 2 had touched it. The red light faded from the monitors one by one. 4 to 7 networks came back online in a single, quiet breath. Margie found him by the elevator. She had the contract printed, physical paper, 2 copies, already tabbed for signature in the places her legal team had flagged in the 20 minutes Robert had spent rebuilding what her $9.2 million workforce had broken. She held it out with the careful, 2-handed deliberateness of someone offering something they understood, for the first time, had genuine weight. Robert looked at it. Looked at her. "I appreciate it," he said, and pressed the elevator button. "Robert." Something in her voice had changed. The executive calibration was gone, replaced by something more unguarded and considerably less comfortable. "What you just did in there, what you built, what you've been maintaining, that isn't a technician's job. That was never a technician's job. I didn't understand what I had." "No," he agreed, without anger. "You didn't." The elevator opened. He stepped in, turned, and held the door for just a moment. "Fix your authentication documentation," he said, "and pay Curtis more. He's the only one in there who actually understood what he was looking at." The doors closed. Outside, the morning had the particular quality of early summer light that makes ordinary things look briefly significant. The parking lot, the glass facade of the Lumina AI building catching the sky, the row of identical sedans baking quietly in the sun. Robert stood on the curb and called a car, and when it arrived he got in and gave the driver his home address. He was home before 9. Shirley was at the kitchen table in her pajamas, working through a drawing with the focused intensity she reserved for important projects. She looked up when he came in. "Pancakes," he said. She considered this with appropriate seriousness. "Blueberries," she said. He was already reaching for the bowl. If this story moved you, surprised you, or made you think, you already know what to do. Like if Robert made the right call leaving that contract behind. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that quiet people hold the world together. The next story drops soon. Don't miss it.